Imagine this. You wake up one morning feeling a strange pressure inside your chest, as if your own skin has become a suit stitched too tight, confining your breath, your thoughts, your very essence. The world outside your window is the same relentless routine, a familiar orbit of tasks, roles, and expectations. But inside, there is a fissure, a restless crack in your being that refuses to be smoothed over by distraction or denial. You glance in the mirror and see a reflection that looks like you, but something vital seems lost behind the eyes. Who is this person staring back? And why does it feel as though a shadow has settled where your soul once sparked? This is the paradox of everyday existence. We live amid a sea of voices, parents, teachers, culture, friends, social media, each whispering, shouting, molding who we should be. And yet, within that cacophony of identities lies an unyielding question, silent but deafening to the very core. Am I truly myself? Or am I a composite of borrowed scripts masquerading as my own story? How can you feel so alone in a world wired for connection, so enclosed by others? Definitions that the boundaries of your own self blur into a ghostly indistinctness. It is a dilemma as old as humanity itself, yet never more urgent than now in the age of hyperidentity, where persona is curated and performed in endless loops. Imagine standing at a crossroads where every path looks like a reflection of someone else's shadow, and the only exit is an inward journey no one taught you to take. What if the key to freedom is not outward success or conformity, but a confrontation with what has always been concealed beneath those social layers, your raw, unvarnished self? Here lies the contradiction that shakes the foundation of who you think you are. Society tells you that stability, belonging, and happiness come from fitting in, from aligning your life with accepted norms. Yet beneath that advice coils a silent scream for individuation, a process as demanding as it is liberating, that calls you to shed the comfortable skin of the familiar and step into a transformative solitude. To individuate is to become a singular being, unique beyond comparison. But this uniqueness is not a trophy or a badge. It is a revelation, a return to something you might have never known was missing because it was buried under layers of expectation and fear. But how can you embark on such a path when the map has been lost or never drawn? How do you pursue self-discovery without falling prey to narcissistic delusions or an existential void? Isn't it safer, easier, to remain within the boundaries of known identities, even if they feel like cages? Yet, the very act of remaining immobilizes something deeper inside, a whisper that turns into a wound and then into a call that will not be silenced. Consider the paradox of being open to self-discovery. It requires vulnerability, the willingness to dismantle who you think you are, to confront shadows lurking in the recesses of your psyche. But vulnerability is terrifying because it exposes you to the possibility of loss, the loss of certainty, comfort, and control. And yet, without that exposure, the self cannot expand beyond its limited shell. How strange, then, that the very destruction of the old self is the genesis of a truer, fuller existence. Ask yourself, what if the person you have spent your life trying to please, impress, or even understand is not the you who is meant to flourish? What if beneath the layers of roles and masks lies an untouched core, a singularity that longs for expression but has been drowned out by the noise of conformity? Is it possible to hear that core and answer its call in a world that demands constant performance? Imagine standing in a silent room, a place stripped of distractions, where the only sound is your own breathing, and in that silence you confront an abyss. It is the abyss of your own being, and it is both terrifying and magnetic. To step into that void is to dance with your own essence, to wrestle with the parts of yourself you have ignored, denied, or hidden. This is not a gentle path. It is a descent into the depths where identity is deconstructed and rebuilt, not as a fixed statue, but as a living, breathing organism, always in flux yet always true. This moment, the awakening to that abyss, is the threshold of individuation. It asks, does your self belong to you, or has it been handed to you by a society that fears what it means to be truly distinct? Can you risk losing the familiar in order to find the authentic? And perhaps most unsettling, what if the person you discover on the other side is not who you expected, or even who you want? Yet the alternative is silent stagnation, a life half-lived as a shadow of what could have been. Between the twin threats of dissolution and transformation lies a narrow path, one that only those courageous enough to confront themselves can walk. This is the invitation, not to escape into fantasy or false identities, but to engage in a profound excavation of the self, peeling back layers until the essence breaks through like a stubborn root bursting through concrete. Can you imagine what it would be like to live unshackled by inherited narratives? To meet the world not as a collection of roles and expectations, but as a unique constellation of potentials. This is the promise of individuation, a transformative rebirth not into innocence but into conscious maturity, where you integrate the fractured parts of your psyche into a coherent, vibrant whole. But how does one begin to achieve such a thing? How do you open the door to self-discovery without being overwhelmed by the chaos it may unleash? What tools, what practices, what courage are required to begin this sacred, solitary journey? These questions swirl around you like a storm, unsettling and potent, and if you feel that stir within, an echo of the call, you are already at the edge. The path will not be easy, but it will be profound. It promises a life not defined by others but sculpted by the truths you uncover inside. Step closer. The journey awaits. You have felt it, haven't you? That persistent tension lurking beneath everyday life, the gnawing discomfort, the strange invisibility of your own name amid a sea of faceless crowds. It is as though the world has laid down a map for you, with roads so heavily trafficked and signs so glaring that the possibility of a different journey seems inconceivable. Yet inside, a murmuring voice questions the very terrain you move through, beckoning you towards something unknown, something deeper. Why does this tension exist? Why are so many lives lived in the shade, fragmented, as if a vital piece of self is forever missing? To understand this, we must first confront something profoundly unsettling: the condition of human existence as illuminated by great minds across generations. Carl Jung, the master of the unconscious, spoke of the psyche as a vast, uncharted continent, divided into parts known and unknown. He named the process of becoming whole, the integration of these hidden parts, individuation. But why is the self so splintered in the first place? Why does this journey even need to begin? The answer resides partly in the shadows cast by society, but also in the shadows within us. As Friedrich Nietzsche warned, modern life often chains us to the herd, compelling conformity in the name of order and security. This herd instinct demands a self smaller than the individual, one softened and tamed to fit collective needs and narratives. To deviate is to risk exile, ridicule, or worse, existential isolation. So many suppress their true impulses, aspirations, and fears, fashioning a mask that pleases others and obscures the fractured self beneath. Yet this self cannot be denied indefinitely. It simmers, festers, and writhes, manifesting as anxiety, alienation, or a strange sense of unreality. Arthur Schopenhauer, bleak yet incisive, called this the will, an irrational, insatiable force driving human behavior, often at odds with conscious desires. This frenetic will pulls us in contradictory directions, dragging us through cycles of desire, suffering, and fleeting satisfaction. Our identities become battlegrounds where this blind force clashes with the narratives imposed by family, culture, and moral codes. The result? A fracturing so severe that the I becomes a puzzle with missing pieces, or worse, a hollow echo in an empty hall. Aldous Huxley captured the tragedy with poetic foresight. In a world obsessed with material success and superficial pleasure, many live not as sovereign selves but as cells in a mechanical organism. The true self, the one that dreams, questions, falters, becomes buried beneath layers of distraction, obligation, and pretense. The paradox is brutal. In seeking to belong, many lose the very thing that could make belonging meaningful, their individuality. Jean-Paul Sartre pushed this a step further. He declared that we are condemned to be free, thrust into existence without a blueprint, forever responsible for constructing our own essence. Yet this freedom is terrifying, for it reveals the abyss beneath all certainty. We cling desperately to roles, ideals, and identities handed down to us, afraid to look into the void and see only ourselves reflected back, a raw, unformed consciousness. This fear of freedom becomes a prison of bad faith, a denial of authentic selfhood that feeds into collective illusions and personal discontent. Viktor Frankl, who witnessed the extremities of human suffering, showed us another dimension of this phenomenon. When stripped of all external attachments, status, possessions, even health, what remains is the search for meaning itself. Frankl argued that the will to meaning is the deepest human drive, even above survival. Yet modern life often obscures this imperative beneath noise and trivialities, leaving many adrift in what he called the existential vacuum. This vacuum is the fertile ground where despair, addiction, and numbness take root. You see now why this hidden force dominates the psyche. It is the confluence of internal chaos, the unintegrated self, and external pressure, the machinery of society and culture, that conspires to keep you fragmented, obscured, lost. The psyche resists wholeness because wholeness demands confronting the unpalatable, the shadowy, the parts of yourself you have been taught to reject or ignore. Society resists it because true individuation threatens the collective order, the smooth functioning of roles and hierarchies. This tension manifests in subtle ways. You might feel a persistent sense of meaninglessness despite external success, a silent scream behind the routine, or an inexplicable anxiety as if you are an actor reciting lines in a play you never auditioned for. Perhaps you recognize the paradox. The more you try to be yourself, the more you feel isolated. Yet the more you conform, the more you feel dead inside. This is no mere psychological quirk, but a symptom of a profound existential fracture. And there is more at stake than personal discomfort. The failure to individuate has consequences that ripple outward, into relationships, communities, even the fabric of culture itself. Without individuals who have owned their shadows, who have integrated their contradictions and claimed their authentic place, society becomes a mirror cracked into shards. Collective neuroses proliferate, tribalism masked as identity, consumerism masquerading as fulfillment, apathy hidden behind spectacle. This is the quiet crisis of our time, a crisis not merely of identity but of being itself. The deep human need to know oneself, to live a life aligned with inner truth, confronts the forces of fragmentation and conformity. The fracture within is mirrored by fracture without. Yet within this crisis lies the seed of transformation. You are standing at the edge of an abyss, yes, but also at the threshold of emergence. The same forces that threaten to dissolve you are the ones that beckon toward growth, if you dare to lean into the discomfort, to navigate the labyrinth of your psyche with courage and curiosity. To individuate is to answer this call, to wrest fragments from chaos and bind them into a living mosaic that is uniquely yours. Still, the path remains shadowed and fraught. The voices of doubt, despair, and distraction will rise to meet you. The abyss can swallow you whole if you are unprepared. But this is precisely what makes the journey sacred, necessary, and urgent. In the depths of your being lies a power waiting to be reclaimed, a power to say no to the scripts handed down, to no longer settle for halves, but to insist on the whole. And so, the question no longer is, why does this fragmentation exist? But rather, will you confront it? Will you unravel the veils and stare into the tumultuous sea within? Will you embrace the paradox that only through losing parts of yourself can you discover your true self? Only then can you begin to navigate the uncharted waters toward transformation, the individuation that redefines what it means to be truly alive. The storm has gathered, the call has sounded. What will you answer? You think you know yourself, but how much of who you are whispers in shadows, shaped not by your chosen essence but by unseen architects weaving threads beneath your skin? Imagine a puppet theater, but the puppeteer is invisible, and the strings are thought patterns so subtle you mistake movement for freedom. This is the quiet tyranny of the mind, silent, pervasive, and cruelly effective. Cognitive biases, the neurological circuits hardened over lifetimes, the cultural tapestries embroidered with expectation and conformity. They conspire to cage you within a version of self that is not entirely yours. These influences do not announce themselves with fanfare. They creep in disguised as intuition, as common sense, as the familiar path. Confirmation bias, for instance, is a cunning whisper that leads you to see only what you expect to see, blinding you to truths unflattering or unfamiliar. It drapes the walls of your inner world with mirrors reflecting your fears, prejudices, and hopes, creating a hall of echoes where your own voice drowns out all else. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to change a deeply held belief, even in the face of overwhelming evidence? That resistance is not merely stinginess of mind. It is the brain's biological imperative to conserve energy, to repeat what has worked before, to avoid the trauma of the unknown. And in that cling to sameness, your potential for transformation lies inert. Neurologically, your brain is wired for safety. The amygdala, that ancient sentinel of fear, triggers the fight-or-flight response whenever the familiar self is threatened. Individuation, by its very nature, demands unsettling that self. It forces the psyche to dissolve hardened structures, to confront the shadowy fragments thrown aside or repressed. And here lies the paradox. Your brain seeks survival by maintaining the illusion of wholeness through repetition and avoidance, while individuation demands the destruction and reconstruction of that very wholeness. No wonder the process is terrifying. No wonder the abyss feels bottomless. But the mind is only one arena of this silent war. Culture, that vast sea of collective belief and unspoken rules, exerts a gravitational pull on identity stronger than most realize. It scripts the roles you are expected to inhabit, drawing invisible lines around what is acceptable, admirable, or even possible. These cultural narratives become a framework, so embedded it is nearly impossible to distinguish between your authentic self and the self you were taught to be. What if the dreams you chase are someone else's? What if the values you uphold are inherited dogmas, relics that no longer serve your growth? This is a subtle, insidious oppression, the conditioning that binds you not with chains but with consent, with the desperate longing to belong. Every time you suppress a desire, deny a discomfort, or conform to avoid conflict, you cement this invisible prison. Each act of acquiescence is a brick in the walls of a labyrinth from which few find the exit. And yet it feels normal. It feels necessary. To question these foundations risks alienation, loneliness, even despair. The cost of breaking free seems to tip scales against hope. Does this not sound like the quietest of terrors? To live a life hemmed in by invisible limits, never fully tasting your breath, your thought, your being. Now, consider the societal reflection of this internal landscape. When millions live fragmented lives, disconnected from their true selves, what kind of world emerges? A world of superficial connections, of rampant anxiety masked by endless distraction, of collective narratives that stifle innovation and empathy. Our institutions, from education to politics, often reinforce these fractures, valuing conformity over authenticity, control over chaos. The resulting dissonance echoes in every corner of society: polarization, alienation, meaninglessness. It is as if the personal failure to individuate multiplies into a societal malaise. This is no abstract phenomenon. It manifests in the spiraling rates of depression and addiction, in the violence born of unrecognized rage, in the yearning for belonging that fuels tribalism and division. Each person captive to unseen cognitive and cultural chains is a node in a network of fragmentation that threatens the very fabric of collective life. If individuation is a rebellion of the psyche, then it is also a revolution of society. The stakes are nothing less than the survival of a world capable of nurturing true human flourishing. Can you still feel the weight of this encroaching silence? The quiet domination of shadows over your mind, heart, and spirit. The slow erosion of self that begins not with dramatic explosions but with tiny acquiescences, unnoticed and unchallenged. You stand, consciously or not, at the edge of this vast, unseen trap. The urgency to escape is not a passing whisper but a roar beneath the surface of your being. It pulses in your bones, it stirs unrest in your dreams. Yet the path forward is maddeningly elusive, masked by the very biases that protect the prison. And here, at this crossroads of despair and potential, something must shift. The old scripts must be read anew. The neurological circuits must be rewired. The cultural tales must be rewritten. You must find a way to pierce the veil, to see the puppet strings for what they are, to reclaim the autonomy that seems stolen but was never truly lost. How does one begin such a feat? How does one summon the courage to shatter illusions, risk isolation, and chart an unknown inner wilderness? Therein lies the precipice upon which the journey truly begins, not with the answer, but with the question. The question that demands more than a nod in agreement but a reckoning. Are you willing to face the invisible forces that shape you, to name the biases that blind you, to unravel the tangled loyalties that chain your soul, to confront the silent architects of your fragmented self and say, I will be whole or I will be nothing? The answer to that question will change everything. And until you confront it, the shadows will deepen, the maze will tighten, and the edges of your being will fray like a thread pulled too hard. Individuation is not a luxury, it is an imperative. It is the only way out of the labyrinth, the only path from shadowed survival to luminous being. But to step onto that path, you must first see the darkness for what it is, and that requires a clarity forged in fire. The fire begins not outside you, but within. Imagine for a moment that everything you believed about yourself, your identity, your values, even your deepest desires, is not truly yours. That what you hold as you is largely an echo chamber of voices. Parents, society, culture, media, ancient fears and ambitions that never felt fully conceived by your own will. What if that self was less a monolith and more a carefully constructed palace of mirrors, each reflecting fragments pieced together to keep you safe, sane, and socially acceptable? Now, imagine tearing down that palace brick by deceitful brick. Terrifying, yes. Liberating, absolutely. This is the paradox of individuation, a path where what you have trusted most must be dismantled so something radically new can be born. To grasp this revolution of the self, you must first understand that individuation is not a process of adding. No, it is the ruthless subtraction of the false. It's not about acquiring new skills or knowledge alone, but about shedding layers of conditioned responses, inherited traumas, and collective scripts that have puppeteered your existence. What if the real power lies in surrender, in allowing yourself to unlearn the known? This runs counter to every instinct programmed to cling to certainty, comfort, and consensus. To truly individuate is to become a heretic within your own mind, questioning not just the obvious lies but the sacred truths you never dared to question before. History offers us a gallery of such heretics, individuals who shattered the molds of their time and forged new realities. Consider Socrates, who, in a society that prized doctrine and conformity, chose relentless questioning over facile answers, accepting death rather than silence. Or Rumi, whose poems peel back the veils of illusion with such fiery tenderness that centuries later, his words remain a revolutionary call to awaken the soul. More contemporarily, think of Carl Jung himself, who diverged from Freud, not merely to dispute, but to illuminate the darker, unexplored corners of the psyche. What united these figures was a radical willingness to walk into the abyss of self-doubt and emerge, not with a neat solution, but with a new lens through which to see the world and the self. You standing at this edge, too, are being invited to embrace this same audacity. But what might this surrender look like, practically speaking? Paradoxically, it requires a fierce reclaiming of control, not the control of dominance or suppression, but the control of awareness. To individuate is to wrest mastery from the unconscious puppeteer, to step into the director's chair of your own narrative. It demands a shift from reaction to response, from automaticity to intentionality. Instead of being governed by habitual fears or social validation, you begin to observe these impulses as data, not edicts. This observant self is your nascent power. It holds the revolutionary potential to rewrite the narrative in real time. This shift is radical not only because of what it demands internally, but because it abandons the comforting myth of a stable, fixed self. What if your identity is fluid, an ongoing work of art instead of a finished sculpture? What if to individuate means to become an artist of your own becoming, constantly shaping and reshaping your inner world according to truths discovered within, not prescribed from without? This is not a call to caprice or fragmentation, but to an integrated complexity. It is the artful dance of embracing contradiction, of holding light and shadow in balance, rather than force-fitting your experience into neat categories. Reclaim your narrative by refusing to settle for the fragmented caricature of yourself society has provided. And yet, this revolution cannot happen alone. Paradox again. The path of self-discovery is fiercely solitary, yet inherently relational. Individuation demands that you dismantle false selves constructed for social acceptance, but it also requires the courage to face others, sometimes those very people who form the scripts you seek to unravel. Can you imagine the strength it takes to say, "I will not be the person you expect me to be," while simultaneously communicating that you still seek connection, honesty, and growth? This is a dialogue with the collective parts that you carry within yourself and the world around you. Individuation is not the exile of the self, but its inevitable emergence as a unique node in a shared human tapestry. How do you begin building this new way of thinking? Begin by cultivating what might feel like a subversive practice. Embrace uncertainty. The mind craves certainty like a moth to flame, yet certainty is the enemy of transformation. Embrace questions without rushing to answers. Live in the tension of "I don't know." Seek the edges of your comfort zone as the fertile ground for growth. This is not naivete, but a profound acknowledgement of the mystery at the heart of existence and your own psyche. Historical rebels of thought have succeeded because they dared to dwell in this psychological limbo, refusing to close the door on possibility. Next, develop what Jung termed the active imagination, a conscious dialogue with your inner world. Visualize the parts of yourself locked in conflict or silence. See the shadow aspects you reject not as enemies, but as exiled voices yearning for integration. This radical self-compassion is anything but sentimental. It is a psychological strategy to reclaim your fractured wholeness. The irony is exquisite. In embracing what you fear most within, you reclaim a power that no external force can take away: authenticity. As Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." This light is your indivisible core, obscured not by darkness but by illusions. Finally, know that this reclamation is a revolution without a final victory. The self is not a prize to be won, but a continual process to be lived, a dynamic unfolding, a profound becoming. Each moment you choose awareness over habit, curiosity over certainty, and wholeness over fragmentation, you take your place among the brave architects of human consciousness. You become the alchemist of your own soul, transmuting shadow into light with every conscious breath. This is the radical proposition of individuation, that beneath the chaos of your conditioned self lies a profound freedom waiting to be unearthed, that the chains are not locks but illusions, and the labyrinth's walls are the contours of your own unquestioned beliefs. And the key, it is the courage to step into the void, knowing that in losing the false self, you discover the true one. In this revolutionary act of self-discovery, you reclaim control not by holding on tighter, but by daring to let go, not by closure, but by ongoing openness to the mystery of who you are. There is no greater power than this, no greater transformation than individuation, and the invitation is now, always now, to become the author of your own becoming, the hero of your own myth, the conscious architect of the life that has been waiting all along for your awakening. Imagine for a moment that everything you have been gripping onto, the roles, the labels, the stories of victimhood or triumph, the certainties that form the foundation of your identity, are not what you thought at all. What if these elements, so desperate to be preserved, are in fact the smoke and mirrors built to shield you from a far more profound reality? What if the self you chase, the image you polish, is not a fortress but a prison? The paradox of individuation, this journey of becoming whole, is that the very thing you seek, the true essence of who you are, cannot be grasped through grasping at all. It turns out that reality itself is not a solid ground beneath your feet, but a shifting, breathing interplay of light and shadow, presence and absence, being and becoming. This is the deepest revelation. Individuation is not a process of building a self, but of unbuilding the illusions that have constructed a false self. It is the radical dismantling of all outer and inner walls, the surrender of all rigid certainties to reveal the fluid, luminous core beneath. Your ego, your conditioned mind, your habitual narratives, they all act like walls of a labyrinth designed to keep you lost, to keep you fragmented. But within this maze lies a hidden truth. The labyrinth is not a prison, but a mirror, reflecting back the illusions that you have mistaken for reality. To individuate is to stop running through the corridors of your own making, and instead stand in the center of the maze, facing the reflection with naked eyes. What if your suffering, your confusion, your endless struggle for meaning are not burdens to be shed but sacred signposts pointing you toward this center? Every wound, every shadow you resist is a message telling you where you need to go deeper, into the mystery rather than away from it. The pain, the loneliness, the longing, they are the language of the soul beckoning you into the unknown. Individuation invites you to listen fiercely, to hold space for the darkness and the light without judgment or haste. Only then does the alchemy begin. The lead of your fragmented self transforms into the gold of an integrated whole. Here is the unsettling, liberating truth that shatters old paradigms. You are not separate from reality. Reality is not a fixed stage on which you act. You and the world are inseparable, woven into the same fabric of existence. The borders you draw between self and other, mind and body, conscious and unconscious, are not given but constructed, and these constructions are the very barriers to your liberation. Individuation is the process of dissolving these boundaries, of entering into a paradoxical union with the other, within and without. It is the realization that the I you have been defending so fiercely is both an illusion and a miraculous doorway to a vast, unnameable mystery. To live this truth is to embrace uncertainty as the only certainty, to choose the void over the safety of familiar forms. It means relinquishing the myth that you must become something else, something bigger or better, and instead accepting the infinite unfolding of becoming itself. This is not a destination but an eternal dance with the unknown, a surrender to the flow of life that carries you beyond the confines of ego and time. In this surrender, you are not losing yourself. You are finding yourself in a way you never imagined possible. You become the spacious silence beneath the noise, the stillness in the storm, the presence that witnesses all appearances without being defined by them. Why does this shift matter so urgently? Because the false self's grip comes with a heavy price: disconnection, suffering, fragmentation. But when you open to individuation, when you dare to confront the void and meet yourself there without retreat, you unlock a freedom so radical it changes how you see everything. The chains you thought bound you fall away when you realize they were never real. The shadows you feared dissolve when you bring conscious light. The labyrinth of your life, once a maze of confusion and despair, transfigures into a sacred mandala, a map pointing directly home. And home is not a place on any map. It is the unfolding mystery of being itself. It is the silent truth behind every thought, the boundless presence beneath every form, the timeless now weaving through past and future. This is the final gift of individuation: to awaken to your essential nature as a fluid, radiant expression of an infinite cosmos, both unique and universal, fleeting and eternal. So ask yourself now, what would it mean to stop fighting the darkness inside you and instead learn to dance with it? To stop seeking yourself in external reflections and instead explore the depths of your own soul's ocean. To see your life not as a problem to be solved, but as a sacred story inviting you into ever deeper mysteries. What if the greatest transformation is not a change, but a revelation, a seeing so profound it rearranges the very architecture of your being? If you hear this call, if you feel the restless stirring beneath the surface of your consciousness, then know this: you are already on the path of individuation. Your past struggles, your moments of despair and ecstasy, are the necessary crucibles forging the self that is not a fixed entity but a living, breathing process of becoming. The final revelation is not something outside you. It is your own awakening to the eternal dance of shadow and light, self and other, form and formlessness. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of the great myth you are destined to live. The myth not written by others but authored by your own courage to know yourself fully. In stepping into this unknown, you walk the razor's edge between madness and genius, chaos and clarity, death and rebirth. And on that edge, you find the true power of individuation, the power to transform not just your life but the very reality you inhabit. So stand now in the quiet, in that trembling space before the next breath. See the shadows that cling to your soul. Feel the pull to retreat, and then, with the fierce tenderness of a lover and the brave innocence of a child, step forward into the void. Let yourself dissolve and reform like a wave chasing the shore. Let your life become a luminous river of becoming, ever-changing, ever-deepening, endlessly free. You are not lost. You are awakening. The labyrinth is not a trap. It is your sacred home, and the journey is your liberation. Will you take the step?